On the first day of December 2017, Maggie Long planned to do Christmas shopping with her sisters, after which she was to help out at a concert. She never made it to the second location. Few hours later, she will be found murdered. Maggie Long burned in a fire that was determined to have been set intentionally. Who set her on fire and why? Detective Unit, I need your Sherlock Holmes hats on for this one. I definitely need you on this one because this case drives me insane. If you see me sweat, just ignore. Just maybe play this one mostly on audio, and then the clips that I insert, just look at those and don't look at my face, because it's about 30 degrees in London today. I will most definitely have a downpour of sweat. I had to sit down to talk about this case. If you see in the background, in the book section, which is probably more focused, let's be honest, everything in the background is probably more focused than my face here. I'm prepping a new multi-parter, at least a three-parter. So I needed some extra time to research on that and to finish that book that's in the background. However, I had this tab open. So I get newsletters from different true crime medium creators. I would really suggest doing that because you discover cases that you might not have heard about from before. And Maggie Long's case has been making its ways to like other people's YouTube channels and blog posts, mostly due to developments that happened to it in 2021. However, when I read this Medium post, excuse me, the neighbors decided to move and I don't have a fan, so that window is open. Just allow for them to back out of that parking spot. Hold that thought, hold that thought. And they go, and they go. I see them. I see them go. Where was I? I have discovered Maggie's story, and upon reading that short blog post, a couple of things immediately stood out to me. So I've done what I do with most of these cases, looked where other people don't necessarily look. I have checked the Facebook page, like done a deep dive on that Facebook page, and I will be playing certain things from there because I haven't seen that done before. And also I have done my Reddit search because there's at least 3 things in this story, if not more, but as general, generalization-wise, 3 things that really stood out to me, and I will pinpoint them as we go ahead because I really need to know what you think about them. Because if they stood out to me, they definitely stood out to the online sleuths, and they have discussed them in different forums online, but I really need to know what you think about those. Because this is one of those cases where the information is so limited, so the speculation is constantly running online. But I feel like this is one of those where the police need to release more information. They just simply need to release something else, otherwise they are really tramping the investigation. I don't know, at least in my opinion. You let me know what you think about it after you listen to this case. But now let us dive into the story and start off with the limited background that we have on Maggie. So Maggie Long would, at the time that she was murdered in her family home, be 17 years old, and she would be living in a town called Bailey, based in Colorado. Bailey is a community of about only 8,000 people that consists of several small businesses, restaurants, and churches, and it's generally a safe place to raise the family. So the Long family did exactly that. They were actually born in Chinese community in North Vietnam, but they decided to flee to the US during the Vietnam War. And this is where they decided to settle. So Maggie's parents were actually business owners that owned 2 local Chinese restaurants and a liquor store in the area. Something that is relevant to this story that Maggie's 2 sisters have said, in particular her sister Connie, is that the family never experienced racism in the area. They were quite well known in the community, and they have never experienced any racial prejudice. And it becomes relevant later, especially with some developments in this case. So I just wanted to mention that. So the family is well known in the community, and this is where Maggie will be born. And she will be yet another valuable member of the Bailey community and would make a huge impact on it. From her sisters, Connie and Lynn, who are still fighting for justice for Maggie, we learned about Maggie's eagerness to spread kindness and joy.
she just had such an eagerness to learn and to learn about others and spread kindness and joy. And I think that's why so many people showed up to her memorial service. So many people reached out to us, and it's just been so overwhelming not being able to experience all these new things in life with her.
Connie, in particular, shares some insight into who Maggie was as a person, and she does it through these anecdotes during the interviews. So, in one article, she had shared that Maggie was just that type of person who would, ask to do something on Connie's computer, and then Connie would find one note that said, "No matter what you decide to do with your life, just be a good person." She was very thoughtful towards her sisters.
When it comes to my sister Maggie, it's all about impact and the impact that she had on the people not just close to her, her friends that she loved, and her family, but the communities that she was part of. Her theater community, her sports communities, her school community. Maggie's impact touched everyone.
Then, in another interview, Connie shares this anecdote about Maggie accidentally on the road when she learned to drive. She was in possession of a car, she hit a bird. And she immediately called Connie. Well, actually, she called Connie after she already took care of it and called somebody to take care of this bird, just showing Maggie's sweet sensitivity about all things in life.
She was seriously the most sweet, kind-hearted person. And one time she called me. She was doing a road trip up to visit me when I lived out of state. And as she was driving along, a bird came in her trajectory and she hit the bird. But she, pulled over crying about it, had to call somebody. And that just, I don't know, really shows like that level of sweet sensitivity.
Her sensitive, thoughtful side would also be shown every year on Maggie's own birthday. Her own habit would be to actually make sandwiches and then spread them around in the community. She would pass about hundreds of sandwiches to the less fortunate, usually to the homeless people on the street of Denver, instead of going out for a party, doing something for herself, spending that money on herself. This would be something she would do for the community each and every year on her own birthday. And yet another anecdote that her family shares, her sisters rather, in this interview that I watched, would be when one of her classmates passed away. So, from what I understand, this would have been in a yearbook, and Maggie actually shared a quote on how to cope with loss. And she just said, "Be good people, be kind, be passionate, be thoughtful."
But Lynna and Connie know.
Yeah, this is a yearbook from her senior year.
They know their sister.
And this is something that she wrote right after a classmate of hers had died. I think the only real cure to cope with loss is to continue to be good people. Be kind, be caring, be passionate, be thoughtful.
As you could imagine, somebody who would be disinvolved in the community, disinvolved in her own town, would also apply that same kind of attitude towards who she was at school. At the time of her death, Maggie would be 17 years old, and she was a senior at Platte Canyon High School in Bailey. Her friends would describe her as a shining light with an infectious smile and laughter who nobody had a bad word to say about. And Maggie's teachers used the words kind, altruistic, genuine, and ambitious to describe her. Her friends, and yet again her sisters, who you can see from these interviews were extremely close to Maggie, would say she would always go the extra mile. Like just having straight A's, that wasn't enough. She had to commit to some extracurriculars. So they were in student council, the sisters were, but she was the student council representative. On top of that, Maggie also really enjoyed acting, so she would get involved in these school plays. I will overlay some footage. It comes with music online, and I will put like the YouTube video in the pinned comment. However, the music is definitely copyright. So you can, use that and watch that at your own leisure. She would be involved in these school plays as part of the company at a venue theater in Conifer. Partially according to her sisters and her friends, this was because she loved being involved. She loved being involved in every single thing, and she really wanted to be part of something, but also had a fear of missing out. So this brings us to the venue theater company, where Maggie would be acting. She really wanted to help them raise some extra money in order to afford to stay in the program, and in order for the other kids to basically be able to act and use their time off of school to kind of like develop on their skills, to actually stay involved and get involved into something like acting. So, given her interests, her passions, who she really was as a person, it wouldn't come as a surprise that to do this, she decided to plan the concert at school. I haven't seen actually anywhere whether or not she wanted to raise some money, but the next lines in this blog post that I have read kind of make me think like that might have still been the intention. Because she wanted yet again to go the extra mile here. So she would have had some VIP audience. I don't know really who the VIP audience would have been here, but she planned to basically maybe sell some cookies, sell some food to the VIPs in order to get some extra money for this venue. This brings us to Friday the 1st of December 2017. This concert is about to take place. So Maggie decides to go home at around 3:30. So she is to leave the Platte Canyon High School at 3:30, go home just to get some cookies. She is driving, she has a driver's license, she's in a car, she's just about to make what was supposed to be about a 20-minute trip. So 20 minutes there, just goes in, takes the cookies, and has about 20 minutes to come back. This means that the friends expected her at the latest to be at the high school by 4:30, give or take 4:30 to 5 from what I have seen in other articles. Just, in case like she maybe has to, I don't know, go take something else from home, maybe there's delay in traffic because of the timing, but everybody expected her to be back for that play that day by at least 4:30 or 5 p.m. One of the reasons that they didn't expect Maggie to be in any sort of holdup is because of the location of this family ranch. I obviously don't have the full address of this ranch, however, from the bird's view, from what I have seen from the news coverage, it seems to be in quite an isolated location. One of those locations where you need to get off of the main road and then drive for quite some time in order to get to like the parking spot or the garage or just the entrance to the property. So they obviously know she has made this trip multiple times before. This should be a really easy ride. However, that evening, her sister Connie arrives to watch that play and also to speak to her sister. So she goes to check the VIP section and doesn't see Maggie. She doesn't see Maggie giving the cookies away. And Connie said immediately she knew something was up. Maggie was reliable, this was her baby, this is what she wanted to commit to, and the fact that she wasn't there, going the extra mile, immediately struck her sister as odd. Connie would say, right away I had a gut feeling. Something wasn't right. Maggie is very responsible and would have never flaked on something like this. So Connie decides to call Maggie's cell phone, but immediately it goes to voicemail. So she decides she's going to drive over to the family home. And as she is driving towards the house, when she was getting closer, her gut feeling just got worse. Connie said right then and there that she just knew something horrible had happened to her sister. Connie would have come to the family driveway around 7:20 p.m. So this is where we need to go back into the timeline for you to actually understand how this unraveled, and for Connie to find the scene the way she did. At around 7 p.m., to be precise, at 7:01 p.m., a man who was renting the room at the Long family ranch calls 911 to report people inside causing damage. I'm just going to actually read you this paragraph word by word because this is something to put a pin in your brain. It's so convoluted and we just don't have any further information on it. So this is from an official news article on the case. At 7:01, the police would be dispatched after the frantic call from a tenant living in a rental unit at the Long family home. The unit was located in the attic, but the tenant claimed they could hear people loudly arguing in the main house, throwing things, screaming. The caller could hear violence and suspecting someone was trying to start a fire or burn things inside the house. They were terrified to leave the home and needed police immediately.
On County Road 43,
She was a sweet kid.
lingered like smoke in the sky.
Possible structure fire, 3763 County Road 43.
At 7:01, a man renting a room at the Long family ranch calls 911 to report people inside causing damage.
However, they are smashing and burning things. He is refusing to leave the attic.
Firefighters with Platte Canyon Fire see flames from the back windows.
1 Adam 28 status.
One line stretching in operation.
A department report reveals the moment at 8:46. The home becomes a crime scene.
No entry allowed and no contact with anybody immediately, witnesses or otherwise, until LE and detectives are on scene.
The body found in a bedroom. 17-year-old Maggie Long.
That is pretty much the information that we have. So from that, people online, and well, just from reading that paragraph, you can gauge that the tenant was probably somebody that the Long family knew, probably somebody that the police had investigated later and had cleared because we have not heard anything from the tenant and they have done like DNA tests and everything. And also that the tenant decided not to leave the family home as it was clearly A, being burnt, and 2, he could hear violence below. Rather, he waited for the firefighters and the police to come to the scene. And this is like something that, as somebody who has looked into the Reddit threads and everything, people have a lot of issue with. So I ask you, pause this video and put in the comments, what would you do in this situation? You hear some commotion downstairs, you are in the attic, and suddenly, I don't know, you smell smoke. What do? What is your priority? Is it to get out of the house? Is it to call somebody and then wait for the help to arrive? What would you act? Because I don't know that I would judge this tremendously, especially if this is somebody that the family had trusted, etc. Like, if you hear commotion, you know somebody is downstairs and then the house is set on fire. So in order to get downstairs, you need to get into that fire. Like, the chances of you burning would be increased. I don't know, this is just like really heavily judged online. The fact that this person didn't try to do anything to help out, to get from the attic, but he did call 911. And yeah, I have like a part of that call that I have probably already played, but this is how the police would eventually arrive on the scene. Something else that I have seen from just one article, and it's never really fully clarified because we do have sketches of the three males eventually, the three assailants. But something that only in one article is mentioned is that this person, this tenant, told the authorities, told the dispatcher, that at least one of the assailants was male. So again, did they see them through the window? How did they gauge that information? I'm not really sure. But at 7:12 p.m., police and fire departments come to the Long family home. So they were dispatched in quite a few minutes. And at that point, the house was already on fire. It was already ablaze. It took them roughly an hour to put the fire out. And while they're putting the fire out, CBI was called to the scene. CBI being the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. And this is said to be a protocol and a common indicator that the fire was set intentionally, that this was arson and that it has to be investigated as such. In our timeline then, at 7:20, Connie makes it home. She sees Maggie's car in the driveway, immediately gets that gut feeling that something is wrong, but the house is ablaze and she has to wait, her family has to wait for hours now for the fire department to extinguish this fire, for them to even figure out what had really happened here. Here, beyond me asking you to put a pin in the tenant's call and what would you do as a potential tenant who is living in the family home attic, there's something else that the police had been judged for, and within reason. if the tenant had called the police at 7:01, right? The dispatcher figured out where the location is, that it's the isolated location, and the person on the other end of the line is telling them somebody is still at the house. They hear the commotion downstairs. That means that the police probably, because they have acted quickly and they have reached that location within the next 11 minutes, they have probably passed the assailants. This ranch, as mentioned, was secluded from the main road and as such only had one way in and only one way out. Here is where I take issue, and this is probably not on the dispatcher, they shouldn't be thinking tactically, but the fire departments and the police should have, when they hear about the location and when they hear the information that somebody is still possibly on the location, to put something in place to possibly prevent them from exiting that ranch. But nothing had been done here. So back to our timeline now. That evening, as the fire is still being extinguished at around 9 p.m., the sister, Lena, so her sisters' names are Connie and Lena, and her sister Lena posts a Facebook post because at this point they're still pleading for Maggie to be found. She could still be missing. She could have escaped these people and possibly is hiding, possibly isn't on the location, even though her car is in the driveway. When this happens, and also already on the location, the family is just sitting idle. So they're thinking, well, yes, we can post on social media, somebody knows something, as the post says itself, and they are giving them the line to call the police department. However, the family is thinking, well, let us try to organize a search party. However, when they suggest this to the police on the scene, the county undersheriff, David Wallers, told the family that wasn't necessary because they should wait and see if there is a connection between the house fire and Maggie's disappearance. From all accounts, and I cannot vouch for this personally, I have no idea when the family here actually learned that Maggie was inside. But this is what sets the sequence of events that is just so bizarre to me. So the next morning, and this is what I have found through somebody's blog post. So somebody who actually went to school where Maggie went posted a blog post on her disappearance at that point. So they said that the following morning they awoke to the Facebook post. So whoever hadn't seen her sister's post, by that morning it was popular, like it had traction and it had comments. And they have seen multiple posts by that point asking the public if they had seen Maggie, with the pictures attached. And when the students would go back to school on Monday, there were also grief counselors on hand for them. So the parents were kind of confused because why grief counselors if she's only missing? Like, did she have a fight with the parents? Like, all of those discussions start forming in the people's heads. And the police wasn't saying anything, and the community needed answers. Maggie's fellow students would be of that opinion throughout most of that week, because it won't be until December the 7th that the police will actually officially confirm that that was Maggie's body that was found in her family home, that she had actually been burned alive. So, as I mentioned, I have no idea when the family was actually told. Were they told that night? Were they told that morning? The next timestamp here in our timeline I have for the morning of the 2nd of December at 9:58 a.m. By that point, the fire had been extinguished and the full investigation of the house had begun. And this is when the Park County coroner was called in. This means that the body had been found. However, the statement that the police had been releasing was that the on-scene investigation is wrapped up. They have said cause and origin of the fire is inconclusive. Still, no sign of Maggie Long, no body is at the fire scene. The police wasn't doing themselves any justice by the people that they were actually bringing to the scene. So they have brought CBI to investigate it as an arson, then they have brought the county coroner, then they brought coroner's deputies, apparently maybe even the night before, the victim's assistants as well, to help the family after a traumatic incident. So even though there was no clear indications to the public, the indicators were there. And now, because there were so many people being brought in, they actually had to issue a gag order that came on December the 4th. And the gag order prohibited anybody, so any first responders, law enforcement, any other personnel, literally everybody named on this sheet of paper, to give any information. And this is in order to protect the integrity of the investigation. Usually the gag orders are kept in place until the police department determines that releasing any information will no longer damage the integrity of the investigation. And here that happened 3 days after that. So on December the 7th, the gag order was revoked. And this is when the press issue was released by the sheriff called Fred Wagner, claiming Maggie's body was actually found inside of the house. Something to put a pin in here is why only almost a week later. Why was it only announced almost a week later, after there were so many indicators that the body was actually in the house? And the police and the fire department must have known that on the night of. That same day, when the press release was issued, a bolo, Be on the Lookout, followed. It was broadcasted at about 4:40 p.m. later that day, on the 7th, to the Denver Police Department. The bolo was going out to be for the late model 90s to 2000s, a light-colored minivan, possibly driven by a white male who was to be in his 20s. Further information in this bolo was that there was a homicide that occurred during an arson, and the suspect driver may have some flash burns due to the fire that they have set, as well as gasoline taken from the house, a large case, an AK-47, 2,000 rounds of ammo of 7.62, and a 9mm Beretta. Please be advised, the subject is considered armed and dangerous. According to the further announcements by the Park County Undersheriff, this bolo was actually a mistake. Rather, issuing it to the wider public was a mistake. They wanted to just issue it, for the law enforcement as a source. Which yet again to the public doesn't make sense, because if this person, at least one individual, is armed and dangerous, then why not release it to the wider public? Why, not just that, but why wait for so many days? This is the only time when I would give them some sort of leeway, some sort of common sense maybe, because maybe they were gathering information on what kind of van, what items have been stolen after the property had been assessed by the family. So this is the only time when I would be like, okay, maybe you had your reasons to wait for the bolo to be issued. However, then, why not release it to the wider public? Why only to law enforcement? Or rather, why was that the intention? Because it had been released to the wider public. According to that interview that I have found with the undersheriff, they said that this is due to the potential problems that could be caused, and what the media is actually reporting, that is quite disruptive to the investigation. However, after crafting this information a week later and disclosing it, law enforcement wanted to know if anybody had seen anything. So they set up a tip line. They added a cash reward to any information that would lead to the capture of Maggie's murderers. And they also started questioning thousands of residents, taking DNA samples from any boys in the town of age of 15 and older. After this, and with no new leads, FBI had been called in. So they worked with Colorado Bureau of Investigation. They would set up roadblocks around the home. They would stop every resident in the neighborhood. They also would hand out flyers showing this minivan, rather the likeness to the minivan. So anything that you see on these flyers is a similar kind of item. Obviously, they don't really know what exact vehicle had been driven. And also the pictures of the items that were stolen from the house. Now, the items that you will see on these pictures is something we're going to be discussing a bit later, because Even though they interviewed and questioned thousands of Bailey residents and have done the voluntary DNA samples, they still came empty-handed. Where this left the investigation is that by 2018, over a year later, law enforcement had to start publicizing sketches of the three potential suspects and also of the similarity to the vehicles, so possible associated vehicles and list of stolen items. The police also had to announce at this point that Maggie didn't just burn in that house, rather that she was intentionally burned alive. This is what the police believed had happened. That Maggie that day returned home, that definitely these burglars didn't expect anybody to be home at that point. They were convinced that she entered the home while this burglary was taking place, she interrupted it, and the crime scene suggested that there had been a struggle. There is also suggestion that, based off of the pictures that you see as well, and what the firefighters had seen, that they, whoever these assailants were, might have tried to start more than one fire, because there was fire damage in the garage as well, and this indicated to them that the suspects had tried to possibly start another one. As for the items that these suspects have taken from the scene, there was an AK-47 that was taken from the Long household, a Beretta, so another pistol, ammunition, and a lot of it, from what I have said, about 2,000 rounds from what I have read, a safe, so like the green safe box, and also some jade figurines. So here is where I start having multiple questions. First, something that pops into my head is to do with that second fire, where I think like it wouldn't harm certain information if they were to release just something else, wouldn't really harm the investigation. Like, when was that second fire set? Can the firefighters not determine that? Because I think it tells us whether Maggie had been burned before that or after. And it tells us something about the psychology of the individuals. Did they stay on the scene and then attempted to start another fire? It just tells us about the callousness and like the patience that somebody would go to, the extent that they would go to. Or when did they try to start this fire? How unsuccessful was it? How come that the person that lived in the attic didn't really notice that? That's where something else comes into play. So here, I haven't had the access to a lot of articles because I live outside of the US, and a lot of them have been blocked in the UK for whatever reason. In the one that I have seen that the tenant might have returned home at around 6:30, so they only started noticing the commotion around 7 because of that. I don't know if there's any truth to that. I have only seen that in one source, but it makes me think, when was the second fire or the attempt of it? When did that happen? Did it happen before Maggie's death or after? Something else that really stands out to me here, and I don't know why my brain does that, but we'll talk about it later as well, is Maggie left that school at around 3:30. She would have been home even before 4 o'clock, which means between 4 and 7 she was in that house. Again, when was she set on fire? What happened to Maggie between those 3 hours? I don't even like to think about it, but you kind of have to, and I hope the police and all of these FBI people are, in terms of just who they're looking for when it comes to this individual or individuals. Like, what is the profile of this person based off of the information that they have, based off of the autopsy records that have never been shared with the public that they have, based on what actually happened to Maggie. I hope that somebody is actually looking into what type of the assailant are they looking for, based off of what happened to Maggie and how these fires have been set and distributed in those 3 hours. By 2018, Maggie's death, as mentioned, was officially ruled a homicide, and there were 3 sketches that have been released. meaning 3 different men have been determined to be connected to this case. The police released these composite sketches of the suspects, as well as requests for information when it came to AK-47, to Beretta, to jade figurines, and also to the safe that had been stolen from the house. And the $20,000 reward had been set. From what I have seen on the FBI website, that is still the reward set by the law enforcement, but it had been increased to $75,000 since. However, in 2018, a few more things happened that just make this case even more unclear. First thing that I'm going to play, hopefully if copyright allows, because this is something that I have found through Facebook, and that is the only press conference that I have actually found on this case that took place on February the 7th. Get ready to feel rage. I don't know what else to tell you, so let me just quickly summarize certain points of this press conference. It is in full. I will put the link to the Facebook page. I don't think this Facebook page is run by the family, but it gave me quite a few resources in terms of pictures and just videos. And the press conference is in full there, about 20 minutes of it. I'm just going to give you the highlights because otherwise you will just feel so much rage watching the whole of this thing. So social media is pissed by this point, and everybody present in that room where the press conference took place was also pissed. So they start off by telling you the classic, this is our priority, you know, the FBI is involved, the CBI is involved, we are committed to this. They summarize the discovery of Maggie's body, and they say that until the remains were officially identified, the name of the victim was not released.
On December 3rd, these efforts continued in the days immediately following December 1st. On December 4th, Maggie Long was identified by the Park County coroner as the deceased person found within the Long residence. As you know, the autopsy report has not been made public to date. I would like to emphasize that the Park County detectives are currently investigating a homicide. Because that report contains investigative keys known only by the person or persons responsible for Maggie's death, we will continue to withhold the autopsy report.
The sheriff then explains the ins and outs of why they're holding back the autopsy report. That they're investigating a homicide, that the investigative keys are known only by the person or persons responsible. So that makes sense. If somebody was to come forward, if they were to have a suspect and question them, and that person says something that only the police would be privy to, of course, then they know they're talking to the right person. Then they will have the closure in the case. Something important that comes from the FBI person here, and why I'm actually playing this conference, which is where I wish all of the focus really was going to, is that they say someone must have noticed a change in a person, whether it is your coworker, somebody you had known at the time, change in their normal routine. They might have missed work, they might have missed appointment on the 1st of December of 2017, they might have missed a routine engagement. And also after that, maybe on the same day, maybe on the next day, they might have had like a physical alteration, might have changed the hair color, might have changed something to do with their looks. No matter how small or insignificant you might think something like this is, it might actually help the police solve the crime, and there is a tip line that you can call. Then they go on to say that DNA wasn't collected at random, and in a bunch of articles I have read that it was voluntary collection, and that it was done to men of like 15 years and above. Rather here they said that they had specific individuals they wanted to speak with.
I can't speak about the results of the DNA that were collected, but what I can say is that it wasn't done randomly, I think, or it was done randomly. It wasn't done, I think some of the comments I heard was we were going up there, going door to door, just collecting DNA. That was incorrect. We had specific individuals we wanted to speak with, and those samples were collected.
After this, Obviously, it goes to questions, and this is my favorite part of this conference, because every single legend in that audience was just calling them out. They had waited by this point. They had waited for so long to just call them out on something like, why is the press conference only taking place today? So one of them asks, okay, it's February 2018 now, so why ask for the public help today when you issued a bolo and should have asked for help about 2 months ago? And the sheriff responds saying that the amount of information they were sifting through didn't allow them to have this press conference until now in order to go through that amount of information.
I think a lot of it had to do with the amount of information that we were processing. We were being very careful on what we had, on what we were sifting through, and we wanted to give our investigators an opportunity to go through that. Yes, I would say we would like to have gotten out earlier, but there was a reason why we had to wait.
Sheriff, can you explain to the community why one of your deputies lied to them?
I'll give you an example.
They said there was no body found at the house.
Well, I don't think they purposely lied. We didn't want to say exactly who it was until we had an opportunity.
I understand you
don't
don't want to say who it was, but you should have said that there was a body found on scene.
Well, like I said, we made our comments, so we'll live with that. Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Another absolute legend in the audience asks, why lie to us? That there's no body found at the house. And here is where this man, this sheriff, just goes, and he was not prepared for this question somehow to be asked. I don't know why, it's the first question anybody would have asked. So he says they didn't purposely lie, that they just didn't want to say who it was, but that they made our comments, and just does the classic thank you and then moves on to the next question. Another person, smartly so, again asks, well, okay, none of this makes sense, because the reason you issued bolo and didn't really want to issue it to the public is the danger to the public. So we were all in danger, to which the sheriff says that there was never any threat to the public, that they continued to work on the case and they assessed the risk. And you have risk or threat every day, but based on the information that they gathered, there was just no threat to the public, with apparently 3 individuals in a possession of AK-47 and ammunition and a Beretta, and just nobody knowing who the hell they are. After setting a woman on fire, there was no danger to the public. And that was pretty much the end of that conference. How do you think it went? Because when I saw this, I felt so much freaking rage. And so many people online did. And I just haven't seen it before, played in a video. So I was like, yeah, no, some rage should be felt, because nothing makes sense. You cannot convince me that any of these explanations make any bloody sense.
I guess you have risk and threat every day, but based upon the information that we have gathered, we are very confident that there is no threat out there right now to anybody else.
In 2018, there was only one other clue that came on this case, and it came with another robbery. This one happened in Warrensburg, and this is in Missouri. It happened in June of 2018, and the theory that emerged after people actually compared these 2 individuals with one of the sketches in Maggie's case is that maybe these 2 individuals that have actually been charged for this robbery and arson were also culpable in Maggie's case. The similarities here, there's only limited information online on this case, and these 2 have been caught. But there are quite a few striking similarities. From what I gathered, the authorities have looked into it and they have determined that these 2 weren't in bail in Colorado at that point, or that they weren't actually involved. However, here, the occupant of the house was also set on fire, alive. Then there is the resemblance of the individuals involved to the sketches in Maggie's case, and also the charges. They have burglarized the home, they have committed first-degree assault, arson, and armed criminal action. In this robbery in Missouri, the assailants also asked the person before setting them on fire. This person survived, by the way. It's just a freaking miracle and just a horror show on its own. But they asked this occupant of the house for the code to the safe. And also we know from Maggie's home the safe had been taken with them. So maybe there is something there. Maybe Maggie just wasn't giving them the code to the safe and they were running out of time. Maybe they heard the commotion of the tenant coming home and they had to act. They could have, yes, chosen about 1,000 different options of how to act, but they didn't. But maybe that was some sort of connection. However, as I said, the task force that was put in Maggie's place said that, yeah, the similarities are hard to ignore. The investigators really couldn't find any connection between this robbery in Missouri and Maggie's case. The next thing that we have on this case came in 2019 with the potential motive, because here at the beginning of the video we set out to discuss the possible who, which we have by this point covered, and there is not really that much information as to who these individuals are, but also the possible why. So going back to that theory that Maggie might have interrupted the burglary, most probably interrupted the burglary, a lot of people in law enforcement have their own theories as to why that actually resulted in her death, and in such a violent death. Because of the physical altercation that had happened to Maggie, the law enforcement believes that the motive was to conceal their actions. Law enforcement believe the intent of the fire was to conceal actions of these assailants, such as the physical altercation and subsequent robbery. And some people in law enforcement believe that at least one of these men has to be a hardened criminal.
The men set the fire that damaged a home and burned Maggie alive.
At least one of these three people that did this has got to be a pretty hardened criminal. To light a woman on fire that's alive is just a horrible thing to do, and it's not something that very many people can do.
This would actually fit in their family's theory, that if the three people are actually capable of killing a woman in this way, they're definitely a danger to the community. However, also because of the nature of the crime, because burning somebody alive is quite personal, a lot of suppositions online are that Maggie might have known her killer, that this is somebody who wanted to do her crime. However, Connie, her sister, for Dateline said that she absolutely did not know them, that there is no way that anybody who knew her sister would do something like this to her, that she was probably just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This to me still doesn't explain the motive to its fullest. It doesn't explain the violence. However, further developments in this case might. So, 2 years after Maggie's murder, the family decided to sell their home. The realtor said that after what happened to their daughter and the sister, the family wasn't actually able to even step their foot inside of the house. So, with no further updates, May of 2021 actually comes along, and this is when the FBI announced that they're now investigating Maggie Long's murder as a hate crime. They believe that Long family was actually targeted after initially thinking this is just a crime of opportunity, that this is just to conceal what they have stolen or to conceal what they had done to Maggie. A hate crime is defined as a criminal offense against a person or property that at least partially, if not fully, has as its motivation individuals' bias against a race, religion, disability, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. This type of crime is statistically on the rise. In 2020, hate crimes rose to the highest level that they have been in more than a decade. And to be specific to the current topic, Asian American hate crimes in major US cities rose for about 150% in 2020 compared to the previous year. A lot of people online will disagree with this decision by the FBI, rather this classification of it as a hate crime, and will just see that Maggie was in the wrong place at the wrong time, that she had interrupted a burglary, and that this is why the assailants have acted that way. And because they believe this might have been the political move that was actually timed right for Biden to approve this measure intended to protect people of Asian descent, because they have been increasingly targeted for attack since the start of COVID, so since the start of the pandemic. What is important, even if you disagree with this classification, even if you don't think that a hate crime occurred here, is that now additional resources have been added to this case. There was a 5-person task force that is now actively working on the case. There's just more eyes on it. And you actually see it. Like, the way that I have discovered a blog post is because of this classification of this murder as a hate crime. The way that more eyes are on it on YouTube. There are more people covering this case anywhere that you look. And the team, the 5-person task force team, insists that there are numerous leads that they are now following up on. Maggie's family, as I mentioned, didn't really see this as a hate crime as such by definition, because the family never experienced racism in the area. But then Connie said, well, think about the brutality of the crime. This wasn't just a burglary gone wrong, rather it was a violent act of murder. And race and gender might have been a factor. Would this kind of violence have gotten to this level if she had not been a woman, or if Maggie wasn't of Asian descent?
So, we know the facts as others do. And looking at what happened, this was not a burglary that went wrong. After more details were disclosed and you see how she was burned alive, this is a violent act of murder, not a burglary or robbery that was, planned. It wasn't efficient, considering the few items that were taken, which are still out there, that law enforcement is searching for, guns and whatnot, but this was not a professional robbery, right? So I think that's why we're looking at race being a factor. Certainly gender may have been a factor, and I think in these ways, this is a discrimination case. Would the violence have gotten to this level if she were not a woman? Would the violence gotten to this level if she were not a minority in the community, or perhaps other compared to the suspects? And, perhaps our family background, running restaurants, being Asian, made us a target in terms of the timing of the initial incidents. But, we keep in very close contact with the FBI and updates on their investigation. And as we spoke to earlier, Park County is a small population. They have limited resources. So working in conjunction with the FBI is truly important for making progress on this case. And that's why I believe the FBI sought additional resources by declaring this case as a hate crime.
This is truly, in terms of updates, where the case stands now. And each year on Maggie's birthday, her family gets together to remember her. Maggie's sister Connie says that when they're all together with friends and family, they just feel Maggie's energy. They feel like they are with her and they just never want her to be forgotten. In that light, Maggie would have turned 18 on December 17th, only 2 weeks after her murder. And her friends decided to continue the tradition of making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and handing them over to homeless every year on her birthday in Maggie's memory. The venue theater also dedicated a scholarship in Maggie's name called the Maggie Long Award, and they award this scholarship to people who embody Maggie's beautiful spirit. They have also created a seat plaque that bears her name in one of the seats where she would always sit, eat the cookies that she would distribute, and also socialize with people. Connie would say about this dedication, it is a seat she would always sit in. She loved being in the theater, and you can see how her legacy lives on here, in the place she loved. This is where, as I mentioned, this case stands now. So there's only a couple more things that I would like to discuss, not even as theories. I don't think we can plausibly say this is exactly what had happened here. This is what happened in Maggie's case. There are cases that I cover where there's enough information for even two angles, and then we can see which one flows better. This just isn't one of those cases. There's no story that makes more sense. So this is more of a corner of three things, just generalized, that irked me. That like, I have told you to pin in your head, and where I actually went onto social media and onto Reddit to see did they irk somebody else. And as you can imagine, they did. The first point revolves around the circumstances of that burglary. So everything here, the call from the tenant, the fact that the authorities believe that the motive was that she interrupted the burglary, this being seen as just the burglary and nobody really assessing the psychology of the people inside based off of like the timeline and how long Maggie actually spent in that house. So just to break that down, a lot of people are criticizing the 911 call and the lack of information that we have on the tenant. And the fact that whenever he was to have returned home, if the information I have seen is accurate and he returned home at 6:30 p.m., seeing Maggie's car, seeing at least one other van, why not do something about it? Like, why did this man just see this additional car in the driveway and then just went on his merry way and went into the attic? Why not immediately go and check up on the flat? What kind of relationship did this man have with the Long family? And something that was confirmed actually in that press conference is that the family had always cooperated. So whatever I say next isn't directed like in any way against the Long family. It's just a theory online that I found interesting based off of the items that were stolen from the residence, including an AK-47 and also including the Beretta pistol. So, first thing, as somebody who isn't in the US, a question I have for you is how common it is to have these two guns just for protection, an AK-47. Like, how common it is to have them at home? Because this is where people's theories online are, well, what if they did have them for protection, especially with that amount of ammunition? What if that was what they had in order to protect themselves from the tenant? What if that relationship with the tenant wasn't great? And maybe the tenant was the person to have wanted, this place robbed for the guns to maybe sell them or whatever. Maybe he honed in on that, and maybe that's why the guns were stolen. It's just one of the theories. Obviously, they must have looked at the tenant and have discarded this person completely. It's just the question of the guns for me as well, as to how common are these guns to just be held around for protection, or why would the family have them? And has the police really looked into that? Another note on the guns, and this just being the burglary, is what if the tenant knew that they had guns in the house, heard commotion, maybe thought this was the Long family and something was afoot, and that's why he reported it. But also, if this were to just be a hate crime, it wouldn't have also resulted in a robbery. So we have the question of like the items that have been stolen and why those particular items have been stolen, in terms of why steal certain items that, yes, are of high value, but are probably more trackable than electronics. The family presumably must have had TVs, must have had some audio equipment, something else that they could have also stolen if looking to make some quick cash. Because yes, with guns, they have to remove, you have to probably scratch the tracking number in order for them then to be sold illegally, but it's a lot more hassle than just getting something that's easy to sell Also thinking about the cars, they could have easily been spotted. If the police actually did their due diligence, those cars would have probably been spotted like just exiting that driveway, where somebody could have noted down the license plate and those people could have been caught. And we'll speak about the other items in a minute. However, here we come to the second point, and this is just kind of like an underlining thing that I have read in a bunch of posts online, and I have to admit that it might make some sense, and that is the timeline and the multiple just lies or just concealing of the information by the deputies in this case. That there was no body at first, delays in the press conference, delays in the Ebola alert, and in a few places I have seen the insinuation as to what if somebody is covering something up within the police force? What if they know who did it, or at least one of the individuals, and they maybe have some connection with somebody in the sheriff's office, with the police force, and that's why it is being covered up. There's nothing supporting this, rather it is the lack of information that is making people have these questions as to what is really happening. And the family, as I mentioned, is cooperating with the police, so I truly hope that they know more on each and every one of these fronts, each and every one of these doubts, and have the access to autopsy reports and know exactly what happened to Maggie. However, as I keep mentioning, I think certain information, it would be nice to offer it to the public. Even if it is just a confirmed timeline, even if it is just that they have cleared the tenant based off of XYZ, I think it would help that person as well never to be looked at as a suspect. Something that wouldn't compromise the integrity of the investigation and would still mean, like, if they have the real person in custody, they know that that is the real person based off of the information only they would know. But I feel like the first thing that comes to mind with this case for me is Snapchat murders, and there the police again would only release limited information, and sometimes you understand it, but the delay in releases of some information can also really fumble the investigation, can also really just ruin it rather than make sure that there are some movements made. So I just hope somebody does sort of see something that they can release here, whether it's the FBI or the police, which might lead to closure to the Long family. The last thing here is really the items that have been taken, and with some of them how particular they are. So yes, if the safe had been taken, it might mean Maggie didn't give them the code. It might mean that they just had discovered it late and have taken it to try to break into it. Then there was the question of the guns, as to why, yes, the family had them, can that tell us something, but also why they would have taken those guns in particular and not anything else. And then there were the jade figurines. So this is quite intriguing to people online, and they have actually checked the value of these figurines. After doing a quick Google search, you can find out that they start off from just $5 per carat and occasionally reach up to 3 million per carat. This obviously depends on whether these jades were actually real, whether they were actually valuable, and also just how big were these figurines, could they even get anything from it. So the online world is divided in terms of seeing this either as this being a targeted robbery because they knew there would be guns in the house, because they knew there would be a safe, they knew there would be something to rob, and they knew that there would be these jade figurines. It's quite a particular item to take from the house compared to, for example, a TV, which you know in the immediate worth just by assessing it, just by briefly glancing at it. And then also there is a completely different opinion online as to, well, if this was a hate crime, if this was just people who are ignorant, who don't even understand like the value of anything, they might have thought, oh, this has to do with people of Asian descent. This has to do with them. It must have to do with their culture, and just taking them just because they were uneducated, just because they wanted to maybe trigger somebody even further. Just some points that irked me there, and some of them do go in line with the idea that people who targeted this house maybe have targeted it based off of this being a hate crime, based off of this being an Asian family. And regardless of what you think, it should have more resources put into it, and it should be investigated as such, purely based off of how gruesome this crime is. I just don't believe that Maggie had only died because she interrupted a burglary. I do think something had happened between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock that whether they have tried to conceal or they have just been having some sick fixations that they had to exert and now they had somebody to exert them on, any resources here are useful. And I hope whatever your opinion is, you share that same kind of principle where every single thing here matters in order to bring whoever these people are who are danger to the public to justice. So to finish this video, let me use Connie's words. When we get together with her friends for her birthday, I love seeing how they've changed and what their lives are like now. So many paths she could have gone, but hers was cut short. It is not fair, and I don't think we'll ever understand why, but we can't let her be forgotten. The FBI is offering $75,000 reward for any information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the people who committed this crime, and I will put the tip line in the pinned comment as always. So now I would like to hear your thoughts. I'm passing it on to you. What kind of thing irks you? What kind of thing doesn't make sense? And is there a story that does? Like, did something jump at you where you think, okay, this is what makes sense, this is what the police should release or should look into? In my personal opinion, Maggie, yes, did interrupt the robbery, but at least one, if not all of these three individuals were sick in the head, just trying to feed off of whatever fixation they have had. I don't know how the tenant fits into this story, how the police and the lack of information and why they have released it in such a way fits this story, but I feel like there are multiple scenarios based off of clearing up some of those doubts, based off of possibly shedding doubt on one of the people or more, where then a scenario would be formed. But I do hope they look into the psychology of the individuals based off of the information that they would have. They would have the autopsy records, they would know exactly what happened to Maggie, and also they would know when the fires have been set, in what locations, where was Maggie found, and how. And by that, the FBI, whoever is in the highest capacity that was put on this case, could probably determine what type of criminal they are looking for. And if they release that information to the public, again, I think it would be extremely helpful. Just sort of like, yes, age ranges, what type of job they're to have, things that they have tried to mention in the press conference, but in much more detail. And yes, some of you might think like she has seen a lot of Criminal Minds, all of it, multiple times. Yes, but then again, if you have that information and you have that knowledge, you have people assessing somebody's behavior for a living, it should be an obligation for it to be released to the public. I don't know, call me crazy, it should be somebody's obligation to release this or some more information. Something that wouldn't ruin the integrity of the case, but would bring some sicko who burned a girl on fire while alive to justice. It's just... it makes me so angry. It makes me so fucking angry. I cannot imagine how this family is fuming every single day. I just cannot even imagine. And I have watched so many interviews. It's just the composure that they have trying to find their sister's killer is just something to be admired. I don't know what else to tell you. Except that I should be back in a week, probably, from now, bringing you first parter of the case that is where the book is behind me. Words, what are words anymore? I'm gonna go now and, I don't know, buy a fan, open more windows. Hopefully the sound was okay on this one, because you could hear my whole neighborhood passing by. It's great. London living. Move to London. Don't. We had a good summer this year. It's actually not like completely shite compared to all of the previous years. British people would disagree, they can't handle the heat. This one can. Look at me, palm trees. Okay. Let me know your theories in the comments, and I will be seeing you in 1 week's time. 1 week. Yeah, you promise? You promise? Don't promise shit. Promise shit. Like, this case is massive. This case is massive, but it boggled my brain forever. Nobody had done a deep dive on it before. Your homegirl has to. It's just how it is. I'm not even getting paid for it. Like and subscribe. Get me paid for it. That's the solution to life, to just life in general. I look like a ghost. I usually need my glasses. I do look like a ghost. Okay, bye guys, that's it from me. Bye, bye, bye.